It is time now for Money Power Politics. While the world waits to see if the Supreme Court strikes down the president's tariffs, Costco is not taking any chances. The very popular wholesaler is suing the Trump administration to get a full refund of new tariffs it paid so far this year. It is also looking to block any more import duties from being collected until a final decision is made by the nation's highest court. And dozens of other companies, but much smaller ones, have filed similar suits. Costco is the first big dog to weigh in and say the quiet part out loud, which is American businesses and consumers are the ones paying. Back with us tonight, Bharat Ramamurthy, former National Economic Council Deputy Director and author of The Bully Pulpit on Substack, and financial journalist Brendan Greeley. His book, The Almighty Dollar, comes out next year. Bharat, Costco, the first big company yet to demand a refund. What do you make of this?
Yeah, as you said, they're telling the public what we all know now, which is that American companies have been shouldering the burden of these tariffs, and not just American companies, American consumers are ultimately shouldering the burden. I think the interesting thing for me is that if these tariffs are in fact struck down, and if in fact Costco and these other companies are successful and they get refunds for the tariffs that they've already paid, will that money end up going back to the consumers who've had to pay higher prices over the last several months to compensate for these higher costs to the companies? And I think the other big thing for me, as you noted, this is the first big company that is willing to step up and sue the administration. I think it's a sign after the first several months where you saw a lot of big companies sort of unwilling to take on Trump in the court of public opinion or in literal court. It's a sign of a broadening weakness of the Trump administration and of the president himself. I think he's rapidly approaching lame duck status. And I think the fact that a company like Costco, which really doesn't get itself mixed up in politics too often, is willing to go out there and put its face behind an aggressive lawsuit against the president, again, is a sign of weakness of this president.
Brendan, forget the money actually getting to the American consumer. That's like second derivative. Let's say the Supreme Court rules to strike down the tariffs. How exactly would the payout to these businesses work?
Well, I think that's the challenge that Costco is recognizing right now is that it's an interesting court filing because it actually lays out how this process works. So what happens when a company imports to the United States, they look at the tariff schedule and they say, this is what we think we owe on tariffs. And then the CPB looks at that and then after a couple of months says, OK, we agree or we disagree, and they settle it out. This is a process called liquidation. The problem is, as Costco points out in its filing, it's running up against the time limit for some liquidations. That means it may not be able to get the money back. And that's the challenge. And I absolutely agree. This is a political act. We sometimes forget that companies are political actors. They aren't just buffeted by the forces of the economy. They're making their own choices. They recognize that they have a chance to stand up against the administration and complain loudly, or they have a chance to accept what the administration is doing. I think it's really interesting that Walmart is not complaining because they're certainly paying the same tariff schedule, and they're certainly looking at the same possibility of not being able to claw money back, even if the Supreme Court decides that these tariffs were illegal. It's a major step for a major retailer to do it. It's very curious that the other retailers haven't yet.
Bharat, today the president downplayed America's affordability fears, calling it a con job, saying that Democrats created this, and Democrats are saying baloney. This is real. But here's the thing. Things are really expensive. People are struggling, but that has not stopped us from spending. OK, Black Friday sales, huge. U.S. economy is expected to grow next year. When I walk out of the studio into Times Square tonight, it will be filled with tourists.
Yeah, we noticed this when I was in the White House, too, which is this kind of grumpy consumer concept, right, where people have money. And if you look at the data, people's incomes, by and large, are keeping up with higher costs on average. The issue is that if you put yourself in the shoes of an average person, let's say your wages have gone up $5,000 year over year and your costs have gone up $4,500 for the same things, that's very frustrating, even though you, quote unquote, come out ahead. And that's what we dealt with in the Biden White House. And I think it's what Trump is dealing with now. What we know is not successful is telling the American people to just get over it and be happy with what they've got. You've got to do something to actually address their affordability concerns. And what's noticeable about this administration is that they've actually pursued what I call an anti-affordability agenda, right? The tariffs have directly raised the cost of goods across the economy. Their policies on housing, including on immigration, have raised the cost of building new homes. Their policies on energy have canceled clean energy projects, which could potentially bring down the cost of energy. Across the board, they have taken the opposite steps that you would want to take if affordability was your primary concern. And I think the American people are catching on to that.
All right, new topic that lots of people are talking about today. Brendan, Michael Dell and his wife Susan have pledged more than $6 billion to fund what is likely going to be called Trump accounts for 25 million U.S. children. The president says they will be the first real trust funds for every American child. What is your reaction to this?
I mean, I don't think it's a terrible idea. I think we do want, as Michael Dell points out, to get people invested early in American growth. The challenge is, as you know, from your time on Wall Street and as a close observer of Wall Street, that's not really where the growth is anymore. These accounts go into publicly listed companies and basic tracker funds. They have to by law. That's not where the smart money is going. The people who actually have wealth are investing in hedge funds. They're investing in private equity. These are things that normal people don't have access to. So I am absolutely all for making sure that every American has access to American capital growth. It's a problem right now and has been for a long time that only 50% of Americans even have access to stock investments as part of a 401k plan, and only 10% of Americans own stocks outright. So if we can increase either of those numbers, great. That's good news. We still need to address the discrepancy, the massive gap between how the wealthy invest and how the rest of us invest.
Well, I would just say I'm not sure if investing in hedge funds is what everybody should do, because paying 2 and 20 makes little sense to many. Bharat, what do you think of this?
Yeah, look, I agree that it's good that we're getting more money in the hands of predominantly lower income kids. I think one of the big problems we have in this country as a public policy matter is that we shower money on seniors by and large. If you look at Medicare and Social Security, and we are quite withholding compared to the rest of the world in terms of providing support for the younger generation. I honestly am a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of billionaires working through the federal system and getting charitable donations to provide this money. Look, we have a system in place for providing these kinds of supports, and that's the tax code. If it were up to me, we would have a tax code that demanded a lot more of people like Michael Dell and allowed the government to decide how that money should be spent rather than having billionaires decide what pet projects they would end up funding.